with any convertible owner and they'll tell you the same thing. Driving a convertible is a one-of-a-kind experience.
It can always make you happy. You cannot be sad when you drive a convertible. You just can't.
Well, let's put it this way. I wouldn't consider anything but a convertible. It's just an amazing feeling.
Lance Zuckerbraun drives a Ferrari F355 convertible. Only a few hundred are built each year and command a price of more than $120,000.
With a convertible, there's no top. You've got the sky, you've got the road, you've got the wind, you've got the sounds of the road, the tires hitting the pavement. I mean, just you're part of nature and machinery all at one time.
With a 3.5-liter dual overhead cam V8 engine, its 375 horses can produce speeds in excess of 170 miles per hour.
Here, you want me to punch it? All right, here we go. That was 65 miles an hour. What was that, about 3 seconds? Let's call it 4.5, just because I did get a little excited myself.
But there's no sense having a car this exciting if it's not a convertible.
The coolest thing about this car, I tell you, is just simply, besides the engine, being a convertible is just being able to do that. I mean, where else, how else can you just put your hands up and go, I'm free, baby.
Freedom. That's the defining experience of the convertible. Cruising down the road with nothing but sky overhead. But there's something more. No matter the year, no matter the make, only the convertible gives you the option of open-topped or closed car driving.
A convertible is essentially a closed car that offers open-air motoring as an option. When the top is up, it's fully enclosed. Normally, it has wind-up windows. The top more than likely would be padded, so you have a nice, comfortable, closed car. And when you want it to be open, you just put the top down, roll down the windows, and all of a sudden you've got a car that's open to the elements.
But not every open-top car is a convertible. Roadsters, for example, are two-seat open-top cars, but they have only a meager top and no windows. Touring cars, another topless option in the early days of the automobile, have unlined tops and only side curtains for protection. Neither roadsters nor touring cars are convertibles, since neither offers the choice of being fully protected from the elements. The first true convertibles were only offered around 1915. Before then, driving was a dirty, dusty, hazardous experience. Virtually all cars were open, though later touring cars came with a flimsy top that did little more than protect the passengers from the rain. As the demand for closed cars was growing, the manufacturers had a problem. The cabins of the early automobiles were made of wood, making a closed car too heavy for the small, four-cylinder engines being used. By the mid-teens, however, engines became efficient enough to generate upwards of 20 horsepower, and the closed cabin car came to market.
Even Henry Ford finally bent to the demand for closed automobiles in 1915, building the first all-closed car called the center-door sedan, and then building a model that was a convertible, the first Ford convertible. The 1915 was called a couplet.
The 1915 Ford Couplet had a number of firsts.
It was the first Ford to have electrical lighting, the famous Ford four-cylinder engine, and here was a transformable top.
What made the Couplet really so unique, though, was not the top. That was a standard manually folded canvas covering. What made the Couplet a true convertible were its windows.
There is a window mechanism. These fold up, and then the window pulls up just like in the old horse-drawn era and sat in place. And then when the door was closed, it was a fully enclosed vehicle.
Soon, the idea of a convertible car swept through the marketplace. Standard sedans were being re-engineered as convertibles, but their designs lacked charisma. That is, until the introduction of the 1927 LaSalle. Created by a Los Angeles body designer, Harley Earl, the $2,685 LaSalle was a dynamic breakthrough in car design. When its standard canvas top was down, the LaSalle's new clamshell fenders and vertical front grille gave the car a low, compact look that no one had ever seen before on a production car. Other car companies immediately tried to emulate Harley Earl's new design by scouring his hometown of Los Angeles for the source of his ideas. But they were looking in the wrong place. It was not in California, but in Europe, and in particular, the cars of Hispano-Suiza, where Harley Earl found his inspiration. Though the name literally means Spanish Swiss, Hispano-Suiza was actually a French car company, manufacturing luxury chassis during the early 20th century.
This is a 1928 Hispano-Suiza. This is called the model H6C, Hispano, six-cylinder, and their larger engine. And it was a takeoff from their wonderful aircraft engine. And the engine, though, was the most spectacular part of this automobile. It was a single overhead cam, six-cylinder engine, and absolutely fabulous looking.
The 479 cubic inch engine could generate 130 horsepower and was capable of speeds of 110 miles per hour, thanks to its twin everything, twin ignition system, twin starters, twin distributors, and twin water pumps. All this sophistication came at an incredible price for the 1920s.
The chassis alone, delivered here in the United States, if you wanted to order one, was $10,000. $10,000 for the chassis.
That's at a time when the average income was $2,400, and the standard Ford Model A cost $420. And for cars like the H6C, as it was for most luxury cars of the day, one company would supply the chassis and engine. The coachwork was done elsewhere. With a complete package price of $15,000, not many H6Cs were sold in America. In fact, estimates are less than 30, but their influence was enormous. The following years, car companies like Auburn, Cadillac, Packard, and Cord all had stylish convertibles on their showroom floors. While they were technically little different than hardtop coupes, there was no mistaking their appeal. By the late 20s, almost 20% of all cars built in the States were convertibles. But 1929 brought the crash, Black Friday. The worldwide economic depression clobbered the new car market, except for the convertible. The rich could still afford the stylish models, and car companies were creating even grander designs to catch their eye. When we return, the 1930s and the heyday of the convertible. The 1930s was a remarkable time for the convertible. Though most of the world was still recovering from the stock market crash of 1929, the American elite's desire for the ultimate luxury automobile helped define the decade's greatest convertibles.
Well, I think they're works of art. You can look at these cars just standing still, and they tell you a story, and they're like a great painting.
The hard edges of the 20s were being replaced by sleek, curvaceous lines and bold splashes of chrome. For the first time in their history, convertibles were sexy, and high society was taking notice. Welcome to the world of the Cords, Lincolns, Packards, and the luminary Duesenbergs.
Many people consider the ultimate driving machine was the fabulous J. Duesenbergs, produced by a small firm in Indianapolis, the Duesenberg brothers. The name often confused as being a German car, Duesenberg was an American car.
By the early 1930s, Frederick and August Duesenberg had made a name for themselves as the premier engine builders of their day. The body styling, however, was left to others.
When you bought a Duesenberg from the Indianapolis, Indiana plant, what you got was a chassis consisting of the frame rails, the engine, a drivetrain, the wheels, a steering wheel, even a dashboard. If you strapped an orange crate to the chassis, you could sit on it and then go for a drive. That's what Duesenberg provided. So what had to be done is the car had to be sent to a coach builder.
Dozens of custom coach builders, from California to Europe, took the same Duesenberg chassis and created some of the most stunning convertibles ever made. These designers bestowed the Duesenberg with long, elegant lines. The fact that its soft, flexible top could be hidden in a small space behind the cabin preserved the elegance of the design. There were, however, certain features deemed off-limits by the company. Ever since the 1929 J model, the Duesenberg's radiator, headlights, and hood ornament could not be altered. That's how you knew it was a Duesenberg. And to add to its snob appeal, there were no nameplates or logos splashed across the car. In fact, other than a tiny emblem on the front and wheel hubs, the name Duesenberg could only be found on the inside of the engine compartment, the heart and soul of the car.
This particular model, called SJN, ours built in 1936 on a 144-inch wheelbase, a 17-inch wheel, with the fabulous double overhead cam Duesenberg engine, the supercharger. Many people like to think of these as being, say, 16 cylinders like a Cadillac, but they made only straight 8 engines at Duesenberg. 104 miles an hour in second gear, so they said, and 129.8 in high gear.
Exhaust cutouts added more than just a cocky display of chrome. They bypassed a muffler, reducing the back pressure to the engine and adding even more horsepower. It was just another innovation that made this car so distinctive. To compete with the Duesenbergs, elite car companies like Packard eliminated the cost for custom design bodywork by doing much of it themselves.
Packard and Cadillac offered complete cars right from the factory. They were cataloged cars that were available that you could get in and just drive right out of the showroom.
As most cars were no longer custom built, their designs became somewhat more staid. But what Packard may have given up in styling, they made up for with their engine. In the 1930s, Packard outdid the Duesenberg 8 when they offered a colossal V12 engine. It was the opening salvo in what was to become the cylinder wars.
Packard had a 6 and an 8-cylinder and a 12-cylinder. This is a 12-cylinder. This would be the most expensive Packard that you could own, a big Packard 12.
This is a 1937 factory-built V12, once owned by the movie star Bette Davis.
This is about 185 horsepower, I think. This car would do an honest 100. You could cruise at 80, 85 on these cars in those days. Maybe the roads weren't very good, but the car was capable.
These massive engines generated an enormous amount of heat and incorporated a brilliant new cooling system. The louvers of the front grille were thermostatically controlled. When the engine was first turned on, the louvers were closed, restricting the airflow to the engine, allowing it to warm up. As the engine's temperature rose, the louvers would open. Air would rush through the radiator, cooling the engine down. The constant adjustment of the louvers kept these powerful engines from overheating. The larger engines weren't only treasured for their power. The growing number of cylinders was creating smoother rides and less work for the drivers.
People did not like to shift. If you had a car that was powerful and it had a lot of torque, it meant that you didn't have to shift as much. That's where multi-cylinder cars came in. We're talking 12 cylinders and 16 cylinders.
You're looking at probably the largest convertible automobile built here in the United States, a 1935 16-cylinder Cadillac Cabriolet. Four passengers only, on a wheelbase of 157 inches and an overall length of over 19.5 feet. A huge luxury automobile that Cadillac lost a fortune on.
New peaks of luxurious motoring were scaled in 1930 when the first 16-cylinder car was offered to the public. Surely there was never before such a superb power plant as this.
Cadillac's first V16 was actually introduced back on December 10, 1929. The timing could not have been worse. Just 2 months after the stock market crash, sales of the $7,000 cars were appalling. But Cadillac was convinced that the V16 was important to its image as a prestigious car manufacturer. So they continued the line, making it even grander in 1935.
452 cubic inches and a really fine overhead valve system, which they came up with as being really very, very efficient, and which of course being used today. Really a tremendous vehicle that you could actually start out in high gear.
The impressive V16 engine was shared by both the convertibles and hardtops. Essentially a twin-8, the true beauty of the 32-valve engine was its performance. Firing 16 times for each 2 turns of the crankshaft, it was an exceptionally smooth-running engine. As impressive as it was, however, only 50 Cadillac V16s were produced in 1935. Apparently, the infatuation with style and power had priced the high-end American convertible into oblivion. In Europe, with World War II looming over the horizon, the convertible market was even worse. In 1938, the Mercedes-Benz 540K Cabriolet, the European term for convertible, was the state-of-the-art of European models. But the economic upheaval of war forced sales of the spirited Cabriolet to plummet. By 1940, the convertible's greatest era had come to an end. It was only after the war that they would make their proud return. The automotive superstars of the 1930s were certainly the ultra-luxury convertibles like the Duesenbergs, but they were not the only convertibles being produced.
Oh, a new Ford! And what a lovely color!
Traditional models like the Ford convertible sedan were selling for a fraction of the price of Packard and Cord convertibles. And though they might not have had the celebrity of cars like the V16 Cadillacs, by the end of the decade, one had something its rivals did not: an automatic top.
Well, the very first power top offered on a production car was, believe it or not, Plymouth, Chrysler Corporation's bottom-of-the-line car, and that was 1939.
This is a 1939 Plymouth Special Convertible. Actually, it's the Special Deluxe. And this is the first year of a power top.
The lowly $900 Plymouth not only had the company's first column-mounted 3-speed transmission, but its power top set a new standard for the convertible world.
Here is the power top mechanism. Quite innovative. The top is a wonderful mechanism, and it is a very slow, but it is power operated. And the top is under here, and the motor is in between the rumble seat and the bottom of the boot. This is a rather unique top assembly. When you pull this center latch down, it pivots the outer 2 ones and they hook up. You pull up to align it with air and push it right down. Both arms go and lock it. Quite innovative.
For the first time in automotive history, car owners could push a button and 4 pneumatic cylinders would magically raise and lower the top. It was a major achievement, and the rest of the car world knew it. But just as automatic tops were coming off the assembly line, World War II brought civilian automotive production to a standstill. Duesenberg went out of business, and the Willys Jeep was on its way to becoming America's most popular ragtop.
Soon you'll be able to give that jalopy a well-earned rest. With gas again plentiful, and with new cars and new tires on the way, America will be rolling with a pre-war flourish.
Finally, in 1946, car manufacturers returned to domestic production. It would be 2 more years before the unique styling of the convertible would re-emerge.
Chrysler, after World War II, decided to come out with something very special. People were looking for something to kind of forget the war and kind of get into the new decade. And so Chrysler came out with this land yacht.
In what was truly a bold design move, Chrysler virtually superimposed the classic luxury wooden boats of the 30s onto their newest convertible designs. They included an automatic electric top, the new semi-automatic fluid drive transmission, and the latest L-Head 8 engine. But with more than 4,000 pounds to push, it didn't exactly burn rubber. Nevertheless, it was a big success for Chrysler. Despite its high price of $2,725, almost 10,000 Town & Country convertibles were sold in the 4 years it was offered. The bold look of the Town & Country was the first important design statement of the convertible's post-war era. Soon, the sheer size of the newest models, along with the tail fin, would become the dominant features of the 1950s cars.
The 50s cars are just the epitome of the convertible. They were big and beautiful and lots of chrome. They're just like big old battleships.
What made it all possible were the new, more efficient V8 engines.
Whereas in the late 20s and into the 30s, you had V12 and V16 engines that powered luxury cars. In 1949, the overhead valve V8 really came into its own. It was a very efficient engine, and those could power Cadillacs and Oldsmobiles. The Rocket 88 Oldsmobile, for example, overhead valve V8, 1949. Those engines could power those cars to very high speeds. You could cruise all day at 70, 80 miles an hour, no problem.
These new engines empowered designers to create grand behemoths of steel and chrome, both in their convertible and hardtop versions. Where convertibles came into their own was with the nifty sports cars of the 50s. Only a few designers were willing to buck the trend of the large convertible. One was General Motors' Harley Earl. In 1953, he introduced a new model, and the topless world was turned upside down.
They call her Corvette, and she belongs to the highway.
Codenamed Project Opal, Chevrolet introduced the Corvette in 1953. Small, sleek, lightweight, it was the antithesis of the 50s trend towards big, and reignited the desire for the open-topped roadster. But due to its automatic transmission and smaller engine, the 53 Corvette didn't sell well. Its styling, however, opened the door to a new world of convertibles, a door the Ford Thunderbird drove right through. Sold not as a sports car, but as a personal car, the T-Bird was a hit from the very beginning. The T-Bird outsold the Corvette nearly 23-1. Its comfortable ride and good looks made it the favorite of car enthusiasts and family men alike. The unique removable hardtop, which could be lifted off as a single piece, created an exciting new way to enjoy the open-topped experience.
This is a 1957 Ford Thunderbird. It's the last year of the small birds, or the baby bird as they're called. It's 55, 56, and 57, and then they went to a 4-passenger front and rear seat model.
Dave Baker is a Thunderbird man. He owns the latest T-Bird convertible, the retro-designed 2002 model, and he owns one of the originals, the 57 T-Bird. That year, Ford presented several convertible designs. The Thunderbird offered a removable hardtop in addition to the standard soft top. Its stablemate, the Skyliner, introduced America's first retractable hardtop, a stowable hardtop that tucked completely into the trunk.
The very first retractable hardtop, believe it or not, was not mass-produced in America. It was mass-produced in France. It was a Peugeot Eclipse in about the mid to late 30s. The top really wasn't as well engineered as it could have been, but at the time they had limited engineering expertise in that area, and it was pretty brave to try that, and I give them a lot of credit for putting it out there.
In 1941, Chrysler had experimented with the retractable in its concept car, the Thunderbolt. Dubbed the car of the future, its exorbitant price of $19,000 limited its production to just 6 cars. Only 4 of those cars are still known to exist.
Nobody had ever seen anything quite like this newest, new kind of Ford, the Skyliner, the world's only hideaway hardtop.
Unquestionably, the most impressive retractable hardtop was the 1957 Ford Skyliner. 17.5 feet long, with a 350-pound, 7-foot-long hardtop, and costing $2,942. It took a lot of muscle to bring this car to market.
I guess Ford looked at it as how can I get the best of both worlds? How can I have a convertible but yet still have a steel roof? And I think Ford's idea was pretty interesting.
Originally intended for the 1956 Continental Mark II, engineers remembered the aborted project, tried it on their Fairlane 500, and the Skyliner was born.
This car has 7 motors that do the lifting and the tucking and the screwing down. These 7 or 8 relays in there basically do the positioning and turning on of the motors. And then there's about 500 to 600 feet of cabling, which allows all the information to go around the car to turn on the motors, to tell when the motors to stop, when the positioning of the top is located, where the positioning of the flapper is located, and so forth. All that gets tied back through one little button back here.
Promoted for its safety as well as convenience, the Skyliner went on to sell a respectable 20,700 vehicles in its first year. But the retracting mechanism had one major problem. If any minor part broke down, the operation could stop midway, making the car nearly impossible to drive. Over the next 2 years, sales retreated, and the 1959 Skyliner was Ford's last hardtop retractable. To this day, the Skyliner stands out as an engineering masterpiece, a classic in one of the great eras of the convertible. The only cars to compare were the flamboyant convertibles of 1959, when design reached unrestrained proportions. The end of the 1950s marked a turning point for convertible designs. The sporty 2-door T-Bird had grown into a heftier 4-seater. The Skyliner had come and gone. The trend was again towards big, and designers were pushing the limits of automotive style with the most outrageous models the history of the convertible had ever seen.
The 59, the fins reached their apex, both literally and figuratively. There were very few production cars with fins higher than the 1959 Cadillac.
1959 witnessed the climax in the Battle of the Tail Fin. The year before, Cadillac had been outfinned by Chrysler with their Imperial Crown. The engineers at Cadillac, determined to fight back, offered options like cruise control, electric door locks, and automatic headlight dimmers. Designers added 2 tail lights because 2 was better than 1. And the fins reached spectacular proportions. For many in the automotive world, the 59 Cadillac fins exceeded the limits of good taste. Yet the competition decided not to forsake the fins, but simply turned them on their side.
This is a 1959 Chevrolet Impala convertible. Back in '59, they did have optional motors, and you could get a 6-cylinder, or you could get a medium-sized V8 with a 2-barrel or 4-barrel. And the Impala came with all the extra. That was the top of the line. And the convertibles only came in Impalas. So you got all the chrome and the stainless steel and all the fancy stuff.
1959 was the breakthrough year for Chevrolet's designers. They had converted the ho-hum 58 Impala and transformed it into a masterpiece.
In the earlier Chevrolets, they had the fins that were standing on end. And to get the public's attention again, they laid them down flat, and it worked out very well. And with a cat-eye type of taillight, the only year they had a cat-eye taillight in it. They had dual antennas, and then they had rockets on the fenders with vapor trail. So it really was. It was a car that really got the attention of the public, the young public, and it did very well in '59.
By the end of the decade, convertibles like the Impala were making their presence known on every highway in America. Almost 10% of all cars sold were convertibles, up from 2% just 10 years earlier. The fascination for the convertible would be threatened, however, as the 1960s rolled around. Today, that era is viewed as a time of nonconformity and excessive self-expression. But back then, car buyers were looking for just the opposite. They wanted simplicity, tiring of the overstated designs of the 50s. In fact, the steadiest selling convertibles in the early 1960s were the rather staid Studebaker Lark and the Rambler American.
Fun is what's new in Falcon, the all-time economy champ. And now it's convertible, too.
Cars like the Falcon Futura and its younger cousin, the Falcon Sprint, were big sellers for Ford in the early 1960s. They led the market for a cheap-to-buy, cheap-to-run, middle-of-the-road convertible. But the Sprint lasted just 3 years as Ford gave the car's chassis a more aggressive look. It was the beginning of the pony car, the nickname for the Mustang. In 1965, Ford introduced the youthful two-door Mustang, and it became wildly popular.
You could dress it up or dress it down, make it expensive, make it inexpensive, make it sporty, make it utilitarian if you wanted, just depending on the kinds of options that you ordered. You could get a convertible either power-operated or manually operated.
In the first model year alone, nearly 102,000 Mustang convertibles were sold, toppling several popular models that just couldn't compete. One of those cars, considered innovative at the time, was, believe it or not, the Corvair. The radical design of both its hardtop and convertible models, including unibody construction and an air-cooled engine placed in the rear of the car, did well when it was first introduced in 1960. But within 2 years, the Corvair was being condemned as a death trap. By 1964, a significant number of Corvair drivers, unprepared for the handling characteristics of its rear-engine design, were involved in serious, often fatal, accidents. The Corvair's reputation buckled under the pressure of consumer activist Ralph Nader's campaign to abolish the car. By 1966, despite dramatic changes to the Corvair's design, any hope of its competing with the Mustang were gone. Nader's crusade helped kill off the Corvair, and in the process made automotive safety a top priority for the consumer. By the late 1960s, the convertible's appeal was diminishing, overloaded by fears of unprotected driving.
1965, production of convertibles as a proportion to hardtops peaked. And then after that, it went steadily down, and one manufacturer after another discontinued the convertible from their line.
Most new car buyers were finding comfort in their sensible sedans and station wagons. But while car enthusiasts may have forsaken the convertible, they hadn't completely lost their edge. In search of new excitement, drivers had replaced the convertible with the muscle car, and acceleration was what it was all about.
Well, we're looking at a very unusual car and quite rare. A lot of people like Chevelles, coupes, convertibles, and this is one of 17 only. Only 17 of this LS6 with a big engine convertibles made. And this is the largest motor that Chevrolet has ever put in a streetcar. This big 450, 454. So it really goes.
The fact that only 17 of the thousands of big-engine Chevelles were convertibles tells the story. Despite their popularity just 5 years before, convertibles were fast approaching extinction, their numbers tumbling to just 1.5% of the American market. And it would get worse. After 1973, the fabulous Ford Mustang convertible ceased to exist. And in 1976, after 30 years, the classic American convertible, the Buick LeSabre, was gone. That left only one convertible still being produced in America, the Cadillac.
The last Cadillac convertible was an Eldorado. A very highly evolved car when you think about it. Not particularly well packaged, but it had front-wheel drive. It had four-wheel disc brakes, it had a power top, it had every possible comfort and convenience, and optionally you could get fuel injection too.
But this was the mid-70s, the time of gas shortages, economic downturns, and heightened concerns for safety. Not the time for the monstrous Eldorado.
The 76 Cadillac convertible is huge. You sit there and you look out and you've got an acre of sheet metal in front of you, or at least it looks like that, and you really have to plan your turns in advance. It's not a kind of car you want to throw into a corner.
General Motors watched their sales fall dramatically, and on April 21st, 1976, the last American convertible rolled off the assembly line. It was the end of an era. Since 1915, there had always been an American convertible. It would be years before its resurrection. Though the 1970s marked the end of the American convertible, the European car makers had continued their love affair with open-top driving. The British had their MGs and Jaguar XKEs, and the supercars from Italy continued their tradition of the sleek, powerful sports car. In 1967, Ferrari came out with the 365 Spider. In hopes of attracting the American market, they dubbed it the California. The Europeans had also addressed the public's clamoring for safety with the innovative Targa Top. Back in 1965, Porsche introduced their 911 convertible. The car featured a lift-off hardtop and a folding plastic rear window. In between stood a safety hoop, a fixed roll bar which added protection for the passengers and increased rigidity to the car. It was the perfect solution for drivers who wanted both safety and open-top driving. By the early 1980s, Detroit noticed that convertible enthusiasts with no other choice were buying European designs and older American convertibles in increasing numbers. They decided to do something about it.
Detroit, Chrysler in particular, looked and said, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, eliminating the convertible from the model line. So in 1982, Chrysler brought back a model of the K car as a convertible.
Around that time, Lee Iacocca was desperately trying to save Chrysler from the hands of its creditors and looking for any marketing angle he could find. In a moment of caprice, Iacocca had his engineers lop off the top of his newly designed K-car LeBaron, and he personally drove it for the summer. The reaction to the convertible was overwhelming, and Chrysler immediately went into production. They sold 25,000 LeBaron convertibles in 1982, Chrysler's first convertible in 11 years. Surprised by the LeBaron convertible's success, Ford and GM quickly returned to the convertible market. Ford brought back its Mustang, and GM the Corvette convertible. Enthusiasm for the convertible was growing slowly until a small, inexpensive import from Japan hit the American market. The Mazda MX-5 Miata, a tiny four-cylinder two-seater, was brought to America in 1989 and created an immediate sensation. Priced at just $16,000, in many cases, the cars were sold for twice that amount. The Miata had ignited the public's imagination.
You sit back, you just kind of wind the gears out a little bit more, get the tack maybe 5,000 or 6,000, and maybe you're not the fastest car on the road, but you feel like it. And it's not the same if you have a hardtop, it just isn't.
Borrowing liberally from the designs of the two-seat European sports car, Mazda created the Miata specifically to tug at the heart of the American convertible market, Southern California.
There's a bit of a cachet to it, and I'm positive that whenever I'm driving down the road, or when anybody's driving down the road and the top is down on their car, men and women, they're going to pull up a little bit to see, ooh, you know, is he hot, is she hot? So it automatically gets the attention.
The Miata's enormous impact on California driving soon spread to the rest of the nation, and the convertible's image as the epitome of driving excitement had been resurrected. The revived enthusiasm for the smaller convertible was filling coffers of the car companies and opening new opportunities for their engineers. Car designers recognized that the smaller cars meant shorter and lighter tops and jumped at the chance to bring back an old friend, the retractable hardtop. They hoped to conquer the problems of the massive Skyliner and finally bring together the safety and comfort of a hardtop and the freedom of open-top driving. Mitsubishi tried their hand at the retractable hardtop in 1997 with the Spyder 3000. But the additional cost of $20,000 priced the $62,000 car right out of the market. In 1998, Mercedes-Benz broke through with their retractable hardtop, the SLK. 3 years later, Lexus introduced its own retractable, the SC430. With its top up, it's sleek, safe, and quiet. 23 seconds later, you have a sporty, open-top convertible.
You literally use your index finger, push it down, hold it down for 23 seconds, and it's like magic. The whole thing opens up and it goes into the trunk, and suddenly you're a convertible.
7 separate motors open and close the trunk, center panel, and side windows. 3 more lift the aluminum top on and off. Every phase of the process is monitored by 12 electronic switches, and it is all controlled by a central computer.
Voila! 23 seconds, and you've got a whole new reality.
A new reality, the best of both worlds. That's the experience of the newest convertibles. In the future, it's certain that more and more hardtop retractables will come to market, and the ragtop may bid us farewell. But for every convertible owner, it's never been about the top. It's been about the freedom to choose.